Coach Prime has done it again. Colorado is able to add another top talent from the transfer portal and more about Colorado football. I'll talk about that today on Locked On Buffs.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? This is Locked On Buffs. I'm your host, Kevin Borba. And today, like we do every day, we got some breaking news around Colorado football. We got top stories around the transfer portal. We have attendance at the spring game going crazy. And we even have some very early odds for week 1 and week 2 matchups against TCU and Nebraska. I'm going to dive into all of that. But first, I want to thank you for making Locked On Buffs your first listen of the day. We are available wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us there. And we're going to have everything you need to know about Colorado football every single day of the week. 5 days a week. It's not 7 days a week, but 5 days a week. We got you. We got you covered. Let's dive in. First up, we have the attendance for the spring game. It's going berserk. For comparison, last year they had a few thousand fans attend the game, and the year before a few thousand as well. It was for free. Some students show up, some students couldn't be bothered. Maybe spring break got in the way. I don't really know when spring break is for Colorado, but last year they had 1,950. Okay, not bad, not too shabby. That's about a slight percentage. That's maybe 3% of the stadium's capacity. Let's do the math real quick right here. We'll go 1,900 divided by 50,000. That is almost 1% of the stadium being filled. This year, tickets are on sale for $10. You could buy your tickets now to the black and gold game, and you get to see Deion Sanders, Travis Hunter, Coach Prime for the first time. And there's going to be it's going to be a little bit more crowded. As of right now, Colorado has sold 30,013 tickets compared to 30,450 fans, 450 tickets for the last 7 years. So this year's spring game, which is year 1 under Coach Prime, under Coach Deion Sanders, they have sold almost as many tickets as they have for the past 7 years combined. And when you factor in that the spring game is not until the end of April, it's hard to imagine that they won't sell those, 380 something tickets to go until they surpass that number. It wouldn't surprise me if they sold out. So what does that tell us about Colorado and where they're at as a program, despite what Paul Feinbaum says? And I talked about that yesterday. If you want to check out yesterday's episode, what Feinbaum had to say about Colorado. There's obviously a new energy around the program. I think there's a new fascination with the program. Colorado has always been kind of a program that's been in the middle of the pack, at least the past 20 or so years. Middle of the pack, they've had a few seasons where they stood out, but fan base has always been loyal, but it hasn't really been a brand that garners national attention. I had someone get upset with me when I said they weren't nationally relevant every year. They don't garner the national attention that other programs within, say, the Pac-12 do, for example. But this year, they might be one of the most popular brands in all of college football. They might be the most popular brand in the Pac-12. And I mean, in my comment section, I had someone tell me that they were flying from Atlanta to Boulder just for the spring game. This isn't for a regular season game. This is for the spring game. They have people flying from all over the country to watch them suit up for the first time. And I think it'll be quite the spectacle. We'll get to see all the guys that Deion Sanders brought in through the portal for the first time. And we'll get to see the closest thing to real football we could get. Spring football is it gives us our last fix of college football before we have to wait a few months for the season to start. It gives us our little fix. But here's the thing. I think the amount of people going to the spring game really shows that this program is changing for the better. I don't really think that, because obviously people like Feinbaum, I'm going to keep alluding to that just because of how interesting his stance was. He said that it's going to be a novelty, Colorado, this next season, and people aren't going to care when they start losing. But I think, I don't think Colorado is going to lose as much as people think. We're going to preview the schedule eventually, and I just feel like that's way too bold of a statement. That's not too bold of a statement, but I don't think they're going to win just 2 games or 3 games like many people are projecting. I think they have a 6 or 7 win season in reality. I think they could get to 6 or 7 wins. But I think all the excitement is really starting to show through, and I think people are around the country are just excited to see what they could do. And I really am looking forward to that spring game. I personally will not be in attendance, but I will be watching it on television because it is going to be nationally televised on ESPN, unlike other programs like Oregon, whose spring game was on the Pac-12 network, and all the other spring games have been on the Pac-12 network. Colorado is must-see TV. There's going to be, if I had to predict, I would say around 40,000 people. I think it could get to that point, if not a sellout crowd. Coach Sanders did say he wants it to sell out, and I think it could get to that point, but we'll say 40,000 to be safe. A lot of people want to watch and see what Colorado's all about. They have their fast offense. They have a brand new defensive coordinator from Alabama who's hopefully going to rejuvenate them. So a lot can go right for the Buffs. And before we start talking about the money lines and stuff, which it's very early for money line information, I do need to give a shout out to one of our sponsors over at FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if you don't win, if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel, sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money line to point scores and threes drained. I know personally, with the All-Star break is kind of, I mean, we're in the middle of it still a little bit, but it's almost over. I'm eyeballing a certain Memphis Grizzlies game against the 76ers. I think the Grizzlies are due for a big win over a top team in the NBA. They've been struggling with the West, and I think it all goes back to Ja Morant saying that he's fine in the West, but whatever. The 76ers are in the East. They've been struggling in the West, but they should be fine in the East, and I think they have some pretty good odds, so I would take a look at that one. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/locked on. That's fanduel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, speaking of betting, our guys over at FanDuel, they dropped their odds for not all of college football games. I feel like that'd be a little crazy, but they dropped them for, I want to say it was a handful, maybe 10 to 15 games next season of just notable games that they figured need to have some odds out already. So I myself looked at them today and I wrote about them over at Athlon Sports, where you can find all my writing about Colorado. Me and John are covering the program on prints or digital, I guess. And then obviously we have the podcast and YouTube. So let's start week 1 against TCU. Spoiler alert, they were underdogs in both of them. The TCU one's a bit surprising, and I'm going to get into that in a quick second here. They opened the game as 17.5-point underdogs, which, if you're not very good at football math, that is 3 scores. So they need 3 touchdowns, a touchdown, and they need 3 touchdowns if it's 17.5. Yeah, they need 3 touchdowns to cover or to win, according to the people at FanDuel. I think that is very coverable. And when you consider TCU lost Max Duggan, they lost Quentin Johnston, they lost Lincoln Riley's little brother Garrett, the offensive coordinator. They're losing a bunch of guys from the offense, and I think this is around the time where we see the doubters like Feinbaum, even FanDuel, which great sponsors, but they're doubting the Buffs. And I think all of the Buffs fans know that with all the new players coming in and Deion Sanders' energy and the offensive speed that Sean Lewis is going to have, the offensive pace, not him. I'm sure he's a fast guy, but the offense that he will be calling will be fast. They average a play per 30 seconds. Charles Kelly on the defense is going to try to shore up these. I mean, the defense ranked as one of the worst in the country last year, so you can only go up. But I think Charles Kelly is going to instill a new sort of toughness and tackling ability and just overall pressure on defense that Colorado did not have this past season. If you missed last year's game, the Buffs lost by a margin of, 38-13. So they lost by obviously 25 points. Not sure how much that's factoring in to this year's matchup, but if we're being honest, TCU's lost a lot of key players. And if I were a betting man, which I may or may not be, depending on what state I'm in, I think it would be worth looking at that money line, or the spread, just because 17.5 points, that means you're counting on Chandler Morris, who honestly, when Chandler Morris was playing against Colorado this past season in the season opener before he went down, he wasn't looking that great. The Buffs had a not an easy time stopping him, but they were doing well. It looked a lot closer of a game when Chandler Morris was in compared to Max Duggan. Two, like I mentioned, it's a Garrett Riley-less offense. They hired Kendall Briles um, as their offensive coordinator to replace him. And two, they lost, or three, excuse me, it's hard to count these days. They lost their first round pick wide receiver. So a lot of big losses for TCU. And I think a lot of big additions. Another major addition, which happened Wednesday night, um, for the Buffs. And I think the Buffs are trending in the right direction compared to TCU, who had a great offseason. They signed one of their, I think it was their best recruiting class ever. And they brought in some great transfers, but we don't know how that's going to mix. And I think it'll be a fairly even matchup if I had to predict right now. Obviously, it's very early to start betting on things, but I would expect that line to kind of drop in the future. Moving on to week two, we all know who week two is. I've had people from other people from Atlanta, other people from Florida saying they're going to fly to Boulder for this game. Oh, did I mention that week one game is Deion Sanders' first game as the head coach of Colorado, and they think he's going to go out there and lose by 3 scores? That's bold. That's bold to me. I don't know. I wouldn't want to bet against Coach Prime, but hey, um, you gotta do what you gotta do. Nebraska, on the other hand, is coming to Boulder week two, and this will be Deion Sanders and the new era of Colorado football's first home game, excuse me. And again, open as underdogs. This one's a lot more manageable. They open the lines at 7 point underdogs, which I mean, I think it's an interesting line just because of everything that how do I say this? Everything that the Cornhuskers lost last year, or not lost. I mean, they lost a lot of games. I could tell you that. New coach Matt Rule. They brought in a good transfer class, good recruiting class, but I just don't think they were a good football team, and I don't think they were able to overturn the roster as well as Colorado has. Their biggest outside of their 5 star athlete Nicholas Harbor that they were able to bring in. Um, they brought in Jeff Sims, who was their biggest, I would say, addition. And here's the thing: Jeff Sims, great athlete. Um, I don't know. I just don't trust him as a quarterback. Matt Rule obviously liked him a lot, enough to kind of build the team around. Yeah, or they didn't get Nicholas Harbor. Excuse me. What am I talking about? Um, I totally blanked on that. They didn't get Nicholas Harbor anyway, so that's another person that they're missing out on. But they brought in Jeff Sims. They brought in a few guys um, that Matt Rule thinks is going to help him, and I'm sure Nebraska will be better than what they were, just because it's hard to get worse than what I mean, honestly, it's hard to get worse than how they played this past season. The guy I was thinking of was Malachi Coleman, by the way. Sorry about that. Had a total brain fart. Wide receiver. Nicholas Harbor ended up at South Carolina. That's on me. That's my bad. But Nebraska, yeah, they're gonna have a quarterback competition between Casey Thompson from the Texas transfer, who's having shoulder surgery. They have Jeff Sims, who at Georgia Tech showed flashes of being a great athlete, who has the good ability to throw the ball, but has never really been able to put it together. And I think I just think Colorado's in a better spot to turn things around quicker than Nebraska. And the 7 point underdogs at home in Deion Sanders' first game as the head coach is pretty crazy to me. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess, for that one. Also, before I continue, I do need to give another shout out to a show that you guys should be checking out if you're a college basketball fan. I appreciate you guys making this Locked On Buffs your first listen of the day, but make sure you check out our brand new podcast over on Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. Plus, hear from big name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. Locked On College Basketball available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Yeah. So back to Nebraska, Colorado. I wrote about that as well today. I saw that one and it was a little head scratcher for me. FanDuel has them as 7 point underdogs, and assuming that the odds makers are correct, that means Colorado would be 0-2 before they have to take on. They'd be 0-2. They'd have Colorado State, which hopefully would be a win, and then they'd have to go to Oregon, host USC, and then take a trip to Arizona, and that's a tough stretch. And so I feel like people are projecting just pure chaos in the first 6 games. But in terms of recent history, let's look at how these two teams matched up. Colorado's actually won the last 2 meetings against Nebraska, but the Cornhuskers have won the 6 out of the last 10. The last time they met was in 2019, which that game went into overtime. The Buffs won 34-31. And then they won in 2018. And then it wasn't until 2010 that they had met prior to those back-to-back meetings. I think Nebraska is similar to, and this is not a slight to Texas. This is not a slight to Nebraska, but I think those two programs are similar in terms of they were once a lot better than they are, and they keep clamoring to be back, and they keep thinking that every year is their year. And I think under Matt Rule, I do think Nebraska's ceiling is pretty high. Just look at what he did with Baylor after the Art Briles fiasco that was the Briles tenure. I think he could turn it around. I don't think it's going to be immediate, but I also don't think it's going to be immediate for Colorado. I just think that these two teams meeting at this time, I personally think that Colorado's in a better situation. I think they have a better quarterback. I think they have better defensive players, better offensive weapons right now. Who knows? Maybe Nebraska will really turn it up and ramp it up in the spring, but I don't know. I'm more so leaning towards the Buffs being more prepared than this Nebraska team that lost to Northwestern and just had a lot of issues this past season. So many issues that they were willing to fire Scott Frost before his contract was like, I think they could have saved millions of dollars, and they chose to just get him out of town because it was a disaster. And so I don't think it's that easy to overcome that disaster. Meanwhile, Colorado's added 45 new players. Yeah, that number is raised up one from 44 because, and I'm going to get to that in a second here. Oh, there's no ad right here. Okay, perfect. We're just gonna dive right into it. Okay, if you didn't know, and this is some big news, it happened late on Wednesday. The Buffs were able to add another transfer wide receiver. They added Xavier Weaver from USF, and USF may sound familiar. That's where Jimmy Horn hails from, Jimmy Horn Jr., the speedster wide receiver who could kick return or could be used as a kick returner, punt returner, great pass catcher, great vertical threat, and has also been used in a lot of jet sweeps and out of the backfield scenarios. They brought in Xavier Weaver. I almost said Xavier Worthy. The Xavier Worthy saga this offseason was crazy in its own right, but they brought in Xavier Weaver, who was obviously Jimmy Horn's teammate in South Florida, in Tampa there. He's their 25th scholarship edition for the scholarship transfer edition for 2023. He stands in at 6'1", 180 pounds. He was second team All-American, All-American Athletic Conference, excuse me, after catching a career best 53 passes for 718 yards, 6 touchdowns this past season. His overall reception total is 5th all-time in program history at USF. And he also averaged 17.4 yards per catch the year prior. So very big, deep threat. I wrote about him, and you could check out. I clipped a couple of his best plays from this past season. He's not. I mean, 6'1" fairly big size. He's not like 6'5" by any means. He's no like Johnny Johnson from Florida State, who's like 6'7", but 6'1". But he plays a lot bigger than he is. Most of his like highlight plays are him going up, catching jump ball passes, and coming down with it. This also solidifies that Florida to Boulder pipeline. He's from Orlando, Florida, played at Christian Prep, and was just a 3-star at a Christian Prep in 2019. Became the first player in the history of that school to sign with the FBS program, and in high school, he counted for 2,124 yards, 32 touchdowns. Yeah, he adds. I think because when you look at Colorado's offensive, what they're kind of going to bring to the table this next season, I think I would say that their offense didn't need a lot to like get better because they did so much in the transfer portal. They have Kavosi Smoke, the Kentucky running back, Shadur Sanders. They have, excuse me, let's see. Let me take a look at everybody they got coming in because I don't want to skip over anybody, but they got a lot of people coming in that I think will help boost the offense. Oh yeah, how can I forget? They have 4-star running back Dylan Edwards, who's a speedster who could be used all over the field. They have Adam Hawkins, a wide receiver that was a former Auburn commit. Amarian Miller another wide receiver from Louisiana. They also brought in a couple tight ends. They did bring in someone from Cal, but the one that I'm most excited about is, and I want to make sure I say his name right, Seydou Traore or Traore. I don't know. I'll have to look at the pronunciation. A big tight end, 6'4". He was absolutely bonkers this past season. Colorado is obviously getting a huge addition to the offense in Xavier Weaver. But if let me pull up this stat as well, because this is going to be very beneficial for Shedeur Sanders. Um, 'Cause the Buffs, I think they had a couple returning receivers that were serviceable, and I think they will still these guys will still get to contribute. But I think Xavier Weaver, excuse me, automatically becomes the number one option, even with like Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn. I think he's the number one guy for them. But with the addition of Weaver, that means him, Jimmy Horn, and the tight end who I mentioned earlier, Seydou Traore, all finished with at least 35 catches and 4 touchdowns this past season. Horn had, I think it was three receiving, 1 rushing, still 4. Not to mention Travis Hunter, who's probably me and John talked about it because the speed of Colorado's offense. I think he's going to have more of like a certain package or certain look where he gets in the game. I don't think he's going to be taking full offensive snaps all the time, but I think this offense just got a whole lot better. It gave Shedeur Sanders, I think, a solidified number one. I think Jimmy Horn, not Jimmy Ward, excuse me, that's a 49er fan of me talking. Jimmy Horn, um, I think he could have been that guy, but I think this is better in terms of it gives it gives the Buffs a solidified number one guy. And then looking at who they have coming off like their next guy, they have Montana, Craig, Lamonius Craig, and then of course they have Jordan Tyson. I think obviously Xavier Weaver comes in right away as the number one guy. He's a 5th-year senior. Technically, he'd come back for a second year with Colorado if he needs to because the COVID year. But don't think that's going to be necessary. I think he's going to come in, be the number one. I think it's going to be him, Jimmy, which they're going to have a USF wide receiver core. And then the third guy will probably be, I'm probably going to go Montana, just because he has the big playability. In his first two, he showed it in his first 2 years, and I think he'll kind of be able to outshine for that third spot. Then, of course, Traore at tight end is, I mean, they basically have 4 wide receivers because Traore was recruited as a wide receiver, moved over to tight end at Arkansas State. And I think they're going to be a lot more dangerous on offense than people realize. And this was just a huge addition for the Buffs. And I kind of think it continues to show how big of a deal that Deion Sanders coming to Colorado is. He did say he wanted that Florida pipeline. He said once those players realized it wasn't that cold, they would love Florida. It's also kind of solidifying that Colorado's a hot spot. They got him over Oklahoma, West Virginia, people don't realize. I mean, obviously they haven't had the success. West Virginia's a pretty big brand in college football over on, I guess, the East Coast, the Big 12, wherever you want to place them. But Oklahoma is a huge brand. They've been in the playoff multiple times, and to get Weaver over those two programs, especially the other programs that I'm sure reached out to him because that a guy with that many touchdown catches, that many receiving yards doesn't go unnoticed in the transfer portal. Great late addition. He'll be there for spring ball. The 30,000 fans will get to, the 30,000 plus fans will be able to see him in action with Shedeur and all the rest of the offense. So again, 45 new players for Colorado. It's going to be a heck of a show over in Boulder. And before we move on to the end of the show, unfortunately, because this is our last segment, I do have to thank you for making Locked On Buffs your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Experts Isaac Schott and Andy Pat bring you everything you need to know on and off the court, plus hear from big name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. So yes, to recap, Nebraska, TCU. TCU is currently the 17.5 point favorite. If you're a gambling person, like I know many of you in Colorado are, because it's legal there, I'm pretty sure it is. Go maybe eyeball that bet a little bit. 17.5 seems like a big number. Nebraska, opens as 7-point favorites against the Buffs at home. Deion Sanders first home game in front of what I'm sure will be a sold out crowd. I don't know about all that. The Buffalo fans, if you haven't got your tickets yet, go grab them. Let's see if they can surpass that number. They're currently 30,013 was what was reported. That means you are, let's see, 437 tickets away from surpassing the amount that the Buffs have had in attendance the past 7 years. So once they get to 30,451, that will be as many people attending the spring game as it has been in the past 7 years. So yeah, huge turnout. I think this is just a sign of the times. Colorado is one of the hottest programs in the country. A lot of people want to be a part of it. And of course, Xavier Weaver, huge addition. Great jump ball catcher. Probably will come in as Colorado's number one receiver, and it only helps Colorado kind of compete with the arms race that is happening in the Pac-12. But yeah, this has been Locked On Buffs. I'm Kevin Borba, of course. You can check out our episodes on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, of course. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share these podcasts. I greatly appreciate it. The more likes and views we get, the more interactions we get to have with Colorado fans. So I appreciate you guys for listening, watching, however you get your Locked On Buffs. I appreciate you, and we will see you guys tomorrow.